listening to the Astral Hour. I'm your host, Astral Meadow. Join me as we take a glimpse into the mysterious. Welcome everyone. Today I'm joined with my friend Justin Berry. He is a psychic medium, Reiki master teacher, and initiated granacero or weather worker in the Nawa tradition. His work is focused on bringing others into their heart space by helping to remove blockages between the mind and the heart, helping them to see the power within. This helps them return to a more balanced and connected way of living with the natural world through a combination of ancestral healing, energy work, spiritual alchemy, forgiveness practice, and shamanic healing. Welcome to the show!
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming out. It's so nice to meet you in person.
It's so nice to meet you too.
Yeah, I feel like I've known you, but that happens when I follow people on Instagram or something for a couple of years. And then when I actually meet my internet friends, it is so exciting because there's many that we never actually will meet because they might be in a different state or something. This is nice.
It's so nice. Thank you.
So could you give us a little background on yourself and your spiritual journey?
Yeah. Well, there's 42 years of it, so bear with me. Let's see. It's been a long road. I grew up in the Christian church, in the Baptist church, and was surrounded by conservative people. And I guess around 9 years old, I had an experience where I almost drowned in the ocean, and that really changed me. And it was during that time that I started having more experiences, spiritual experiences that I didn't quite understand, and also kind of understood that I couldn't go to the people in the church about because I had heard that it's not right. It's not,
Right.
Yeah. So from there, I just started questioning. I started reading a lot. I started looking for something. And when I was a teenager, I think I went to Crystal Visions the first time. And it was a store in a mall in Knoxville.
I feel like I remember that. Yeah. Was it Easttown Mall?
It was Easttown Mall, yeah. They had all sorts of crystals and, kind of witchy.
Right, the metaphysical tools and Yeah.
So I started, I got a few books there and I started reading about different things, different cultures, different religions, and finding spirituality in different ways. And some of it felt right, some of it didn't feel right. And I just tried to follow the things that felt right. Mm-hmm. And I guess on into my early 20s, late teens, early 20s, I discovered tarot cards and I started reading for people. And it was a good friend came to me and was like, you don't need cards. Mm-hmm. You need to just let this flow through you. And I started doing it that way. I started just reading the energy that I saw around people and could feel around people, and was realizing also that their loved ones were sometimes coming in, their ancestors. And things started to take a pretty weird turn. I got really ill and had another near-death experience. I almost bled to death. And at that point, I was seeing Sarah Griscom, who's at Gypsy Hands, and she sent me to see her friend Bobby Drennan.
Ah, okay. And I've heard of Bobby Drennan.
Yeah. He became a quick, good friend, and they both said the same thing. They said it's stigmata. It's because I was bleeding. They were like, this is a calling. You have to step into your work. You have to step into your power. I didn't understand what that meant at the time, but I started really searching harder and going different places. I started going to conventions and I had these friends, Fred and Nikki, who we went to all these different psychic conventions and psychic vampire conventions and omnimancer conventions. And so I was meeting people from all walks of life doing that. And a lot of that wasn't for me. But I guess it was around 2000, late 2007, early 2008. I met a woman named Mary Beth Robinson, who introduced me to Sacred Fire, which is a Huichol tradition. And it is bringing people back to fire and back to connectedness, heart connection to community. And that was also around the time that I had my second lightning experience. On the Foothills Parkway, my car was struck by lightning. I got a little zap and my car was pretty much destroyed.
Wow.
Yeah. And I saw Mary Beth at that point. She had studied a thing called plant spirit medicine, and I started seeing her for plant spirit medicine, and was still seeing Sarah, doing energy work and getting readings with her and learning. Met the Maori people. I worked with them a little, and so many people, so many teachers just kept showing up. And it felt like, oh, there's something I'm supposed to do, but I don't know what it is. And after that lightning experience and receiving plant spirit medicine, I had another bleeding experience and almost, did die for a minute. And coming back from that, I realized there's something missing. There's something I got to do. There's something I've got to find. Because I didn't feel connected. I realized that there was something, I just wasn't fully connected to this earth anymore. And I had to find what that was. So Mary Beth introduced me to Don David Wiley, who is a Huichol shaman and a Nawa Granacero. And I had a treatment with him. And it wasn't right away, but he did tell me in the treatment that he couldn't cure it, that there was more to it, but that I wouldn't have to go back to the hospital. And after several bleeds, I never had to go back to the hospital. So that was pretty cool, and I wanted to learn more about that. But I was really, I still had that Christian upbringing in the back of my mind, and there was also this really logical side of me. I have a strong right brain, but I have a really strong left brain too. So I was always like, oh, this is bullshit.
Yes, I know that feeling.
But I guess it was probably, I don't remember the timeline. I'm not good with time. But I had seen him a second time, and then was introduced to a woman who, within the Huichol path, she was on their death and dying council. She helped to do funerary rites, and I did like this weekend workshop with her, and it was all about peaceful death and dying. And in that, I started to really feel something stirring, and realized that the medium part of me, I was really running away from that. I didn't want to be associated with death. I didn't want to be, it was, I don't know why, it just felt so scary at the time. I just kept running away from it. But the running, it took me a while to learn that running, that resistance was what was making me so sick. And I later met another person on the Huichol path. Her name was Deanna Janae, who she and I were talking at a friend's funerary rites, and she was performing the funerary rites, and in the conversation it came up that I'd had this lightning experience, and she said, you need to tell Don David this. So I did, and he and I ended up in this really long discussion about being called by weather, and the ocean, how the ocean almost took me. And the Nawa have a Chalchutlique, is the force of water gathering on the earth. And in that experience, I had seen a woman. She was made of blue-green light. And So I finally found this connection, like, oh, everything he was saying was making sense to me. And he said, well, I think you need a divination, um, uh, because the divination would say for sure about whether or not I belonged in this path.
Right.
But the thing about the divination was, if you commit to the divination, you've committed to the path.
Right.
So it's like, oh, it's a big commitment. So I didn't say anything for a year. I just sort of sat on that, and again was resistant, running away, having all these horrible reactions to everything around me, chemicals, smells. It couldn't be within a mile of the smell of bleach. Different foods started to really bother me. I was just being really reactive, and it was a woman named Mona Lisa Schultz. I did a weekend workshop with her. She's a medical intuitive. She's written a couple of books with Louise Hay. She said, it's like the very first thing she said when she met me, like no introduction. She goes, ugh, you know where all the mold is in this building. You know where all the chemicals are. She was like, you don't feel safe. You have to step into safety. She said, I want you to put your hand over your solar plexus and tell yourself, I'm safe. I'm safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing that. And the more I did that, the more I got comfortable with the idea of making these bigger commitments.
Mm-hmm.
So I got back in touch with Don David. We set up a divination, and he looks at me and says, well, the good news and the bad news is it's positive. So that meant that I was to make a pilgrimage to the San Madres Mountains in Mexico, where the Nahua live, and go through the initiation process.
Beautiful.
And intermixed with all of that, I've kept doing readings. I've kept doing the medium work, but the more I'm stepping into my path, the more that is growing. It's so much stronger. It's more fulfilling. It feels, at the end of my days, I don't feel exhausted. I feel really fed.
Right. Beautiful.
So, yeah.
Also, like, when you were talking about, being like hypersensitive to like chemicals and smells, and that happened to me too, but I never really associated it too much with being like a part of my spiritual journey, but it makes sense because it was sudden. I was like 28, and when my dad died, a month after he died, I developed severe food allergies and
I was 29.
mold.
Yeah.
And it's so funny because there was a point where I would get very anxious if I smelled mold. Like, even if I was on my porch and it had been raining for a while and I smelled mold, I would start kind of feeling asthmatic. And like, maybe that was more psychosomatic, but I just didn't want to trigger any histamine reaction.
Yeah.
But, that's so interesting because that's about our Saturn return years too.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
So, and I'm not as bad now. Like, I have, like, since then, I've noticed the smell. Like, I definitely noticed it. But I've also noticed that I, like, will take a breath and just sort of, I don't allow it to, like, scare me anymore because I just can't live in fear,
Right, we don't do fear.
Yeah.
And that's, that fear, that resistance to the awareness of something toxic is what's really making us sick.
Right.
It's the toxin itself can be dealt with. Our bodies are amazing machines. They can help us process those things. It's also, I know for me, I can't speak for you, but for me it was not feeling safe in my environment and not knowing how to get to that point of safety. I'd done all this spiritual work where I felt settled in my heart, but my mind still remembered all these traumas. And that's what the mind does. It evolves to protect us.
Right.
So, it's always looking for the exits. It's always looking for the threats. And so I was kind of walking around just using my mind. And I had to step back into that heart center, step back into the self, and realize, oh, I am safe. You've done a good job, mind. Thank you.
Right.
And, we're safe now. You can stop reacting.
That's beautiful. Well, thank you for giving me the permission to do that. Because sometimes we do. We just need to almost like say it out loud,
Yeah.
It becomes its own mantra in that way. And like we can just tell ourselves that. we're safe.
Yeah.
You know, I learned that a little bit when I was doing like hypnobirthing, and like we did all these mantras, and I still do them. And it's, you know, you are safe, you are healthy, you are secure, you know, you are strong, and all these things. And like anytime I start feeling like I'm getting anxiety, I just repeat my birth mantras over and over again.
I think that's so wonderful, because it's, you know, that's what, when we've been sick, when we get sick, it's easy to say I'm sick and claim the disease, whatever the disease is. That's something I try to remind clients when I see them is, you know, they say I have, or I, you know, whatever, I have diabetes, or my diabetes. That's my least favorite thing to hear from people. My asthma,
Right.
like, don't claim that. That's not yours.
Right.
You can put that outside of yourself. It's a resistance. It's a disease to something going on energetically, spiritually, and you can navigate that. And you know, our bodies, we know because of the placebo effect that our bodies can heal without anything external. It's
Right.
just a belief. So changing the way we speak to ourselves is so important. You know, I am strong. I am healthy.
I love that. And I do feel like the energy medicine, you know, when we do start feeling a little like we're identifying too much, the energy medicine really can help recenter us. You know, and we do need some help sometimes. We get in our head. There's a lot of fear out there.
Yeah.
You know, you can't even like watch television. Like I don't have cable, but if I go to someone's house and they have television on, like all I hear is side effects just in the background. I'm like, how do you guys listen to this? It's like they've learned to tune it out. But I'm just like, if I was listening to that all the time and just people like spouting out random disorders and stuff on these commercials, and like it's going into your subconscious. Like obviously you're not even taking that drug, but you know, it's like, oh, I guess I could have a seizure today. You know, like I never really thought about it, but it just like keeps it really fresh in our mind that like anything we do could cause these things, or, you know, taking that could cause, I don't know. I feel like it keeps us thinking about that, you know?
Yeah.
But,
That's one of the things I love about Stoic philosophy is it's, you're going to die.
right. And
It's
everything goes from there, right?
yeah, live like you're going to, because it's definitely going to happen. But it's not part of the Stoic philosophy, but it kind of, it's what we focus on grows. And you know, if we're focusing on the side effects, if we're focusing on, you know, war, if we're focusing on division, that's what we're growing. That's what we're, you know, we're building a schema in our brain that's all that exists.
Right.
So look for the helpers.
Yes, look for the helpers. Yeah, there was a lot going on in the past few years where I noticed the division and things like that. And I even like was falling into some of those patterns, and I was like, wait, this is making me feel like they're them and I'm an us, you know, like us and them. And I was like, this is not right. This is not right. Even if, you know, it doesn't matter whose science is right. It doesn't matter whose like ideologies are right. Like if we're scared of each other or we hate each other, or you know what I mean? It just
Right,
like really brought that to the surface to where I was like, I refuse to say I'm a this or a that anymore, because then that makes me separate.
Right. I think it's really scary when we start putting people on the other side of a line from us. It's dangerous. You know, that's the reason wars happen. It's the reason fights happen. It's if we could all just see the humanity in each other. There's this wonderful book called The Holy Men. A good friend got it for me, and I was reading it while my grandmother was passing. And my mom's family can be a little volatile. They're angry people. Can be, some of them, not all of them.
Right.
But I was going into that situation like wondering how to protect myself, how am I gonna be present in this and not engage with what's going on. So I'm reading this book called The Holy Men, and it's repeated in the book over and over and over again. He tells people, treat other people as if they're holy, and you yourself will become holy. And it became a beautiful experience, because I remembered, I can just look for the good in everybody and see the power that they carry. And I want to talk about anger too, because you know, anger is especially in spirituality, is seen as a bad thing.
Right.
But it's not. All of the emotions are important. Anger and fear are supposed to be fast, but they're not supposed to not exist.
Right.
It helps us to reset those boundaries, and we can evolve anger to work for us in a beneficial way and not be so ugly.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So you talked a little bit about, being like psychic. Like how does the information come in for you? And, how do you communicate with some of these people's ancestors and stuff? Do you see them, or is it in your mind's eye? Or
It's different for different spirits, and I don't fully understand why.
right.
But different spirits communicate in different ways, and sometimes I will see someone standing in front of me just like I see you sitting in front of me. Sometimes I can feel a presence behind me and I can hear a voice, and sometimes it's they just sort of take all the images in my mind and move them out of the way, and I start to get these visual images. And that seems to be the way that it comes most often, is I'll get images that I can interpret, things that mean something to me. And that was a long part of that process of growing into what I do. Is it started when I was a little kid. I would see things, and over time, keeping track of those things that I would see, I learned that certain things meant certain things.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's like you're following your own inner guidance. There's not really a book or a map that
No.
that explains it's unique for each person. Yeah.
No.
I feel like my psychic centers have like slowly been opening. Like I had certain things that were wide open as a kid, but lately, the past few years, I've really like been smelling other
olfactory,
like people that aren't there.
Yeah.
It is really wild, and I have like no control over when it happens, but it's funny because it's probably like the least scary way that a being could come to you, is because you obviously are smelling them, like their perfume, I guess, that they wore in their lifetime. A lot of Avon for the older ladies. And I'll be like,
lilac.
wow.
I smell this lilac sort of talc and powder sometimes when I know my grandmother's around.
Right. It takes you back to that that time period. But yeah, it's weird that's like the one that's really open for me. I don't understand. I'm like, I smell dead people. I'm like, surely there's other people out here, right?
Oh yeah, I have an acupuncturist. I'll go in for an acupuncture treatment, and she's like, "Have you been around bleach? I can smell it on you." And there's definitely no bleach in my house.
Right.
It's like, oh yeah, I went to a swimming party.
Right. So it's just like
the chlorine, yeah.
Interesting.
And so she has that ability. I think we all carry. I see it as and Mona Lisa Schultz teaches it this way, and it's the way that makes the most sense to me right now, is that we have our five senses, and then we have those senses are mirrored, kind of. I don't know about right brain. I'm not a neuroscientist, but it's energetically those senses are mirrored. So we have our sense of taste and smell and touch and sight and hearing. And some people will smell things. Some people might hear things. Some people might see more clairaudience, clairvoyance, clairsentience. But I think it's kind of I have to wear contacts in real life. I have to wear contacts and glasses if I want to drive. So my sight is not great, but my visual in the energetic, in the spiritual world is really good. And I don't know if that plays, I don't know how that works, but my hearing here is really, really good. I have almost perfect pitch. And sometimes the auditory stuff that comes through, it's like listening to a transistor radio through a fan. So, I don't know. I'm kind of I used to be very much more so a touch me not. I don't love hugging.
Right. Okay.
I do it now because I think it's important.
Right. The
Yeah.
heart's connecting.
Yeah. But I would feel a lot of things in my body, and that's still the way things come a lot is feeling things in my body.
Yes. I definitely think that sometimes when I feel weird, it's not, I'm not like blaming anyone, but it is something going on energetically. Maybe, I don't know if it's a solar flare. Like there's all sorts of things that people call it. And I'm like, maybe it is, but it comes on quick. And then, like earlier today, like as I was getting ready, I was like, oh my God, I just feel heavy. I was a little like, had some brain fog. I sat down, did my tuning fork, lit an incense, did my mantras, and I was totally grounded again. So I'm like, if it's that easily curable in that way, if I can get out of it that quickly, then I feel like it's energetic.
That is. And that's alchemy. You're evolving that feeling into something else. That is, I used to, part of the conversation between me and Don David that sort of led us to maybe I needed this divination was my entire life, as far back as I can remember, if there was a storm coming, I wouldn't know that there was a storm coming necessarily, but I would get a terrible migraine. And it would either be a horrible headache or I would get the aura and eventually my vision would sort of go away. But there would also come with it this impending feeling of doom, like somebody's going to die, something terrible is going to happen. And stepping into that and realizing what that was, even before the initiation, I realized, in learning to interpret my own symbolism, like this could be a storm. And when I learned to channel the energy in a different way, and this isn't somebody's going to die.
Right.
It would really energize me, and I didn't get migraines anymore. It made me feel like I was vibrating really high.
Right.
So it's such a, interpreting our symbolism is so important.
Right. That's beautiful.
Finding ways to alchemize those negative feelings into power.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's, just like alchemy, working with metals and
right.
It's taking those elements of your being and breaking them down, working with them in different ways, just like the anger. You can evolve anger to work for you. There are people walking around that are just so upset about so many things. Well, they could shift that just a little and help that evolve into action and not be carrying around all that tension in their chest.
Right.
And that's what I'm about.
That's so interesting. There's been a couple times where I've had like a really bitter feeling or just like some icky anger. And in my mind, it's like my mind's eye will show me how that could actually form a tumor. Right. And I'll be like, holy crap, I need to work on this like right now. I am not letting this grow into something, but it's like I can actually see how it starts with just like this really like that resentment or, like not really processing why you feel that way, but like almost integrating the dark feeling versus trying to, find some kind of light to it or at least releasing it, not hanging on to it or whatever. But I do think that there is a link there, sometimes.
Oh,
and it'll actually grow into something.
I think there's a link to even growing it in other people. We're in relationship with everything around us all the time. And if we're harboring intense anger or hatred for another person, another being, I believe that could possibly make them sick.
Oh, yeah.
I do believe in free will.
Right.
So I think it also depends on how protected that person is, how much they're standing in their own power.
Right.
But it's something that we have to really
be mindful of, for sure.
Right.
Yeah, I was reading this Manly P. Hall book on magic, and it really changed the way I viewed magic. And, because we're kind of just doing it all the time. And he was talking about black magic, and he was like, oh, you think of black magic as some, you think of the rituals and the candles, and like, yeah, that is. But he was like, anytime you hate somebody, or anytime you just sit there and think about all the things that you dislike about, like you're actually sending black magic to them. So then I just started viewing it totally different. So now anytime someone like pisses me off, I immediately go and, I don't react. I take some time to reflect on like, why is this making me angry? Why, and I'm not trying to say don't be angry, but give yourself space to process.
Yeah. Process it. And you can ask, they're beneficial beings all around us all the time. And you can ask, like, I need to express this anger. Can you transmute this to love for me? And that's something I learned from Sandra Ingerman, who's with the Foundation for Shamanic Research. She's written 1,000 books on it. Go read them. But she says, if you're in traffic and you're losing your mind and yelling at someone, you're sending them negative energy. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't have a bad reaction if someone does something really stupid and almost gets you killed.
Right.
But, bring that back in. Once you realize it, bring it back in. Call those parts of yourself back to yourself and ask that it be transmuted into something more loving.
Right. That's like the shadow work that it never stops. You're doing it every time you're faced with those challenges, you take them on, So I feel like when you start shadow work, that is like your initiation, right? Like you're like, I'm stepping into this path. I'm going to be conscious and like, maybe I do react to things from time to time, but I'm going to ask myself, well, why was I so quick to react, versus taking time to respond? And
that's what spirituality is about. I don't care what walk of life you're in. You can claim to be Christian or Buddhist or Hindu or whatever you want to be. But I'm not going to take you very seriously if I don't see you living it.
Right.
And it's so important to live it. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of, Leslie Jordan said, it takes a lot of work to be happy. It's a choice. It is a choice. It's a choice that we make, and it's choosing to live that way. It's you get to still be human. You don't have to be perfect all the time. But when you do catch yourself flipping someone off in traffic,
right,
realize what you've done.
Right.
And the effect, the massive ripple effect that could possibly have, and try to do better.
Right. Yeah. It's like there's always these little things like showing us what we need to work on. And if we can look at them as messages, or something to like, okay, check. I didn't get pissed when this person cut me off today. Or, instead of flipping them off, I just took a deep breath and sent them, love, which is harder to do.
It is. It's a lot harder to do. And I think it's also important to reserve time and space for those feelings. I play the piano, and that's sort of part of my spiritual journey as well. I started playing when I was really young, and I didn't realize what I was doing at the time, but I was journeying. Every time I was sitting down to the piano, it was taking me somewhere else.
Yes.
And I've learned to use that to, if I have a bad experience, people in my family have passed away. People have made me really angry. They've really pushed my boundaries. A lot of times if I'm really having trouble coming to a place of peace with that, I'll go to the piano, and again, I sit down, I ask that what I'm about to do be transmuted into love and poured into the universe in a loving way, because that's where the demons come out of me.
Right.
That's where I let all that anger out. And I used to do that in a way, and it would feel like it was breaking my fingers sometimes, and it doesn't anymore.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You're like in these flow states, there's so much more going on than I think people realize, and finding your flow looks unique to every person. I mean, for someone else it could be piano as well. Right. But like for me, it's dancing or making art. Sometimes it's singing.
Sometimes it's cooking.
Yeah, sometimes it's cooking. Yeah, I read this book. What was it? It might have been Miss of Avalon. But in the book, there was this point where she was on the loom. Okay. And while she's on the loom, she would get these visions, and they would call it the sight. So she's spinning, and but she's no longer spinning. She's entering now into this other world. And when I read that when I was probably like 12 or 13 years old, and that part always stood out, because like anytime I make art, there's a point where I kind of check out, and I'm still making it, but I'm like, very like etheric or something. I don't know how to explain it. It's like I can see myself like from behind
Right.
making the art.
I think it's channeling. It's co-creation. You're, when art is born, whether it's a dance or a song or a painting or a sculpture, whatever that is, it's its own being born into
Yeah.
existence.
Yeah.
So it's, we're sort of mothering it here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, I love that. I love the idea of mothering it. That's a really beautiful. I'm gonna keep that one with me. So, all right. Let's talk a little bit about what a weather worker is and what sort of things that entails.
Weather workers are, you know, through so many different cultures, there are different types of medicine people who act as a hollow bone or a bridge between the spirit and the earth, or the spirit and the physical, I should say. And weather workers graniceros are just a specific type of doing. It's about relationship. So, whereas some medicine people have relationships with specific plants or animals, weather workers have relationship with the weather.
Okay.
So we work with the weather, and most of that is gratitude. So when precipitation shows up, I greet it in a certain way,
Oh.
no matter what I'm doing. So if we're having coffee and it starts raining, hang on, I'll be back,
Right.
because it's all forms of medicine work are about building relationship with everything around us. So having a special kinship to the weather beings, that's what weather work is.
That's so interesting. My husband, he always feels like the wind is giving him messages, but they don't talk.
Yeah.
But he can feel all the stuff coming with the wind, and he'll always teach our children, like, I'm friends with the wind.
Oh, I think that's so beautiful.
Right. But he's not even
Yeah.
thinking about it as a weather worker. But I think we're all in some way like kind of tuned into that.
Absolutely. Like, I'm convinced. Bobby Drennan and I had disagreements about this. He thought that you had to be like genetically predispositioned to have extrasensory perceptions. I don't think so. I think it's like anything else. You can go to the gym and work out a muscle.
Right.
We can, in our own way, go to the gym.
Right.
It's about building relationship with the things around us and how we build. So people have different ways of accessing that, but that's just their way.
Right.
This happens to be a way that's easy for me.
Right.
And that's when I was a kid. I would, if it got really windy, I wanted to be outside. If it was storming, I wanted to be outside. I've never had a problem dancing in the rain.
Right.
It's just somewhere that I had that relationship. It was natural to me. And the Nawa talk about they have a word tanali. And in that, different cultures have different forms of shamanic work. I'm using that word as a blanket term because the Nawa call their shaman are called Granacero. The Huichol call them Sarakami or Murakami. But it's it's all the same. It's a job title, and it's the same type of job. But it's Tanali goes back to our spiritual lineage. So we have our ancestry, our physical ancestry, our bloodline, but there's also a spiritual line. And when the Europeans started invading everything, well, before that, when Genghis Khan was invading everything,
Right. Lots of conquering.
all the conquering was happening, and people were losing their death rights. And this is the Nawa. This is not me talking.
Right.
But it's a concept that it feels good to me. They believed that when all this conquering was happening, people were losing their death rights. They weren't really making it fully to their own ancestral realms, and we started to, along the way, become sort of spiritual mutts. So someone who has an Irish, English, German lineage might have a little piece of a spirit from the Nawa or from the Huichol or from, the Tibetans. I don't,
Right.
So as those things show up in your path, there's a lot of conversations around cultural misappropriation. I think we should be careful.
Right.
But if something is showing up in your path, don't be afraid to study it and follow it, and really listen to your being. And if it's time to let it go, let it go. If it's time to dive deep into it, because it might be really significant to your path.
Right.
Because it is.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up, because I do think that sometimes people are scared to go into certain cultures. But, like you've studied with cultures, they've invited you in, they've taught, if they're open to
Right.
teaching you, and you're taking it, as a sacred, thing. And like, it's really how you're going about it. It's not that these cultures can't be studied and, understood. And then maybe even you start participating in the rituals with them. And, but I just had so many past lives,
Right.
that I'm like, I don't want to, take away from the other cultures, but I have memories being in those cultures. And I don't think that I should just ignore some of those things just because I happen to have, light skin in this lifetime.
Right.
When you see yourself in these other ways, it's almost like you're okay with it. It's like, okay, well, I'm drawn to this culture because I'm from there.
Right.
And I do have ancestors there and they support me, And I think some people might just not understand just how interconnected we really are.
We are all interconnected, and it's so much of it comes back to identity. And I don't identify as a Nawa person. I'm obviously not. I'm
Right.
obviously not. But being initiated in that path, sort of adopted into their culture. Well, part of my work there and in this exchange is that I make a pilgrimage there twice a year. So they're giving me these sacred teachings, and I get to bring this sacred work back here.
Right.
And try to work in beneficial ways for our own area.
Right.
And I also take myself back there and give back to them while I'm there.
Right.
So
And keep it alive.
It's about exchange, but it's also about we don't have to, just because you're really into Buddhism, you don't have to make Buddhism your identity.
Right.
We, especially here in America, we're so cultureless.
Right.
That we're craving that, and we can be interested in things and bring things back into our lives and create our own culture. And that's what I think this is, what the Tenali brings us back to, is you might have a lot wrapped up in you, and you can create your own.
Right. I kind of advocate that on the show of just, you can create your own rituals and they're actually just as powerful. Now, I'm not saying that what our ancestors have given us is not huge and like a big key, but that's the cool thing about studying them and honoring them. It sort of helps awaken things within you because you're like, oh, that feels really good to me. I'm going to make that a part of my ritual.
Part of what I loved about when I first started learning about the Nawa tradition was they refer to it as a living tradition. It's ever evolving. And that is where I put the brakes on hard in a lot of other mainstream religious practices, is that we're doing it this way. This is the way it's always been done. This is the way it will always be. That's not the way the world works. The world is ever evolving.
Right.
And we can evolve with it. Our practices can evolve with it. And I think it's so important to listen to our ancestors and to listen to and have relationship with our beneficial spirits. And it's wonderful to have gurus and physical teachers, but so much more important that your spirit has that relationship with your land, with everything around you, and that's your guiding, that's your guide stone. That's what's pushing you. Because that's where your peace is going to be.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Being comfortable with where you're at. I definitely think we choose where we're born. I don't think we always have to stay there.
Right.
But there's something special about, that place on the map that you came in.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of us, especially, growing up here in the South, we were kind of taught that people from here were dumb.
Right.
And so I remember being little and just really wanting to, eliminate my accent and not be like seen as being from here. And I was like, I'm going to get out, as soon as, I just wanted to be anywhere but from Tennessee. But it's been a really beautiful experience, like loving this area and coming back to it and seeing it as actually a beautiful foundation for me. And the mountains protect me, and the rivers teach me things. There's so much like natural beauty that's still here, and I'm actually very grateful to have grown up and been able to like play out in the woods, and there was always like nature around. So, and if I would have been in New York City, I might have not gotten that. So yeah, I do have a little accent, and sometimes I say things and I feel like it comes out and it doesn't sound very intelligent, but I know that I'm smart. I know that I have this ability to learn and that I'm not some stereotype.
Right.
But it is, it took me a while to be okay with being from here.
Same. I had a similar experience. I worked, when I was a teenager, I worked really hard at getting rid of my accent. And, I've let that go a long time ago, so it's back. But also that, not really being connected to the land. I had similar experience growing up, going out into the woods and really being connected to the land.
Right.
But being kind of intellectual and not really fitting in necessarily exactly where I grew up.
Right.
And just wanting to bust out of there. And it's funny because I got really obsessed with ancient cultures.
Yeah.
And along the way, I realized the Shikonahay, the Smoky Mountains, are the oldest mountains. They're some of the oldest mountains in the world.
Right.
It's like, this is my ancient culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, once I started thinking about the mountains, like the mountains are home. So it's not Tennessee.
Right.
Like that's a new word.
Yeah.
But there's all sorts of sacred energy here, and it's been here, since the creation of the planet. Like it's ancient. Everywhere that you could even be on the earth carries like ancient wisdom. So it's just a really cool way of looking at it, and then being grateful to be from here and to have all the seasons, and I love it now. Anytime I do travel, I'm always ready to get back home now, and it's so funny that it shifted like that.
I love traveling. I love getting out and seeing other things, learning about other places and other people. But what always happens is that I appreciate home more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
It is the mountains, it's the rivers, it's the beings of my land, but it is also my family, parts of them, and my pets and the community that I've built here.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a wonderful spiritual community here, and I love this platform, and I love getting to share this wisdom with everyone around the world. And we're in like 50 countries now. But this is the Appalachian wisdom that, comes from growing up here. And we have a different way of communicating that wisdom because of the way we articulate things, the way that we were raised, to think a certain way. So there is a lens there. And I don't think that it's like something to just be discarded, No. And I love that we get to share that with the world. And I think it helps people shift the way that they view people here from Tennessee as not just the Beverly Hillbillies. Because I really was like traumatized from that as a kid, because I was like, I really don't want to be a Beverly Hillbilly.
That's funny you brought that. I was just talking to someone yesterday about the Beverly Hillbillies, and I remember I was traumatized because I was probably, I don't know, 8, 9, 10, when I realized that they were making fun of us.
Right.
I didn't know.
Right. Like
and
the actors weren't true hillbillies.
Right.
Like they need to hire real hillbillies to play those roles. Yeah, I've been able to make peace with that. And, I was raised in a small town. Like, we had mountains. And so it was, like, all about hunting and camouflage and NASCAR and all this. And I'm not into any of that. But
No.
I have to, like, accept that there's a lot of people around here that are. And it's been a journey to, like, learn to meet them where they're at, too.
Well, thank God for people like Trey Crowder who are, still, full view of the hillbilly in him, but he's a very smart person.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the thing is like you can be smart like in any kind of body. This is something that I kind of battle with is the more I've stepped into, dressing myself up and feeling beautiful, the more people think I'm dumb. And it's so funny. And I actually feel like people think that I have nothing good to say because I've like curled my hair that day or something. And I'm like, I was smart before I got into the whole like feeling glamorous thing, and I'm still smart now. And it actually didn't change my intellect at all, like just because.
Oh, I've gotten a lot of that just because my other profession is I cut hair. I'm a hairdresser,
Right.
and I've been in situations where I would tell you, "What do you do?" I'm a hairdresser, and it's like immediately they're not listening to me anymore.
Right.
But that's on them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember the drag queen that said it, but I think it was the most important piece of advice I've ever heard. It's none of our business what other people think of us.
I think that was RuPaul.
Oh, I hope so.
I love RuPaul. That is true, though. I wish, I think if someone would have told me when I was younger, I probably wouldn't have heard it,
Right.
But there was a point where I did hear him say that, and I was like, that's actually really important. Like, it's okay. Like, I don't always like everybody, like that I meet. Sometimes I'm like, oh, they have a weird vibe. I don't necessarily want to continue on that journey, but it's okay if people think that about me too. If they're like, wow, she's pretty far out, she's bringing up a lot of stuff that I'm not cool with, and that's totally okay.
Yeah.
Like we can send each other on our paths in peace, and realize that not everyone is meant to stay. Some people are just passing by, and that's fine.
Yeah, whether it's people or all things, it's some people really like black olives on their pizza.
Right.
I don't.
Right.
But that doesn't mean black olives are bad.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's so funny how we come here with these tastes and like these just things that we're more drawn to, and I thought about that just the other day, like liking something, a taste of something that someone just hates. And I'm like, that's so interesting that we're just wired. And that has nothing to do with anything we're consciously choosing. Like when we were born, we had there was like some kind of program set that was like, you're not going to like olives, like that's me with okra. Like I try okra every like 5 years and I'm like, I still don't like it. Like I want to like it. It looks good. It smells good. But I don't love the texture of the way that it breaks down, and I'm like, okay, but that's so specific and like random and weird that like all of these people love that, but I just don't. But I think we're supposed to be different. We're supposed to have different tastes and different interests.
It's so important. It's so important that we have different tastes and different interests and that we bring different things to the world because the world needs all of us. It needs it needs all of our gifts, and everybody carries with them their own, we're all bringing our own special, unique thing to the world. And Carl Jung said that there were 16 personality types, but it's so much deeper than that.
Right. I think those are like the surface of the archetype,
Right.
but, I think about, like a king archetype. You could, branch that out into like 20 archetypes within that king.
Right.
So, I think on the surface, we might be able to relate. Like I'm very hermity. That's like an archetype that's big, but I also have the ability to be social if I want to,
Well, I think that's another important thing about archetypes and astrology and all the things that we use to sort of map out our lives, some of us, is it's funny. I heard someone say this yesterday, and I think it was Colin Bedell. Something about someone had said that they didn't believe in astrology. He said, that's okay. It's an experience, not a belief.
Right.
It's so much of this is just experience. We don't have to wrap ourselves we don't have to create a belief system around everything that we do. You don't have to, I'm an INFP on the Myers-Briggs, but I don't have to like create,
Right.
I am an INFP. Like,
Right.
I can be an extrovert. I can be sensing. I can be a thinker. And I can also get it together sometimes and be more of a J.
Right.
And
I
be
think it's
on
just
time.
like showing us the polarities, that I might lean more towards introversion as far as I do need to recharge there. But, I'm not so far on the scale of introversion that I'm like repulsed by extroversion. You know what I mean? I'm like kind of in the middle. I'm not INFJ, so they're the extroverted introverts.
Oh, yeah.
So it's funny because like just that alone taught me that it's on a sliding scale and that it moves all the time. But I do rely a lot on like my intuition. Like I rely on it a lot, but I do consider myself to be a thinker as well. But a lot of times the things that I choose to like hyper fixate on and study further start out as an intuition, like a hunch that I felt. Then my thinking mind is like, we need to research this, but I actually receive the information intuitively. And then I'm like, okay, now I need to know like dates, what century was this from? Who is this being? So, it does turn my thinking mind on so I can see it sliding on the scale. And I think, I kind of feel like that's what Jung was getting at is like, this might be like a temperament that you're comfortable with. But if you need to access the other, realizing that you're really perceptive or versus judgmental, sometimes you need that discernment.
Right.
Sometimes it is just a perception too, and so but some people, it's like just the way they say that they're Buddhist or what, they just totally like stick with that. And my friend Noah, he's the astrologer that really got me going, and he talked about astrology as like, don't reify it, don't make it concrete, don't we want it to stay alive and fluid, and we want it to have room to evolve. And so if you get so caught up in being like, I'm a this, I'm a that, you kind of miss that. Like the whole key is that you have all of the signs within you, and like different things based on transits are going to highlight those energies. But yeah, I'm an Aries sun, but I'm so much more than that, you know? And I love that. Like if you go a little bit deeper into astrology, like right outside of this just sun signs, you start realizing, wow, I'm like very intricately made, like my design is actually beautiful. And just because, I have that 12th house stellium doesn't mean I can't find balance in that 6th house too. It's like it's a sliding scale of polarities. We live in a part of the universe that operates on polarity. So like once you figure that out, like if you're too much this direction and you feel out of balance, well, you can actually find the opposite and try to find that fulcrum in the middle. So
it's like it's a navigation. I always think about it as like navigation. It's if I'm faced with something that's not necessarily within my nature, I can let my GPS recalibrate, and like I know from where I'm starting,
right?
So I can find my way out of it.
Yes. I heard I think I was reading it in a book somewhere that it might have been somewhere in India or something that they don't ask you how you're doing. They ask you where you're going. Like, where did you come from? Where are you going? Instead of being like, how are you today? And there's something about like reminding you, like, where are you going? Where have you came from? And like keeping that question alive within you. And I kind of love that.
I love that.
Versus just saying, hi, how are you doing? Like, where have you been? Where are you going? But if we asked ourselves that pretty regularly, I feel like, it would give us more direction on the path. Like asking, where am I going? Because like if you don't know, then any path will take you there. But then it kind of helps you be that trailblazers and create your path. But if you don't know where you're going and like you don't have any intention or any, you might like follow someone else's path or just like build your house right in the middle of a four-way, I don't know. Like it's just an interesting thing to think about. I don't feel like we quite do that in our culture, but I love like when they say Satnam and it's like it reminding you of your true self and these just little greetings that have like a vibration to them that goes beyond just saying hello. Yeah. I love that. I love that.
I love that.
So, Let's talk a little bit about ancestral healing and how we can access that.
I think the best way to begin accessing ancestral healing is you start with yourself. The ancestors live within us. We carry their epigenetic memories. We carry their DNA. So you get to know yourself.
Right.
And do the work for yourself. In our culture, we're taught to not be selfish. We're taught to not feel certain things, but I don't think that's to be confused with really, really understanding who you are and knowing what you love and what you don't love, and finding that internal navigation. That's where we start with ancestral healing, because the more we work on healing ourselves, the more we heal ourselves, the more we're healing our lineage.
Right.
Because we're the end point, and it's some people would argue they don't exist anymore. So it is all you. Well, I believe that they absolutely exist. They exist in another realm. They exist in this realm too.
Right.
But it's about going in and finding where they show up in us, and how they show up in us, and doing that work to create peace and balance within yourself, and that will go back and heal that as you go.
Right, because you are a part of that, and this is the thing about like learning the Akashic Record stuff, is that time, like we think that our ancestors existed, hundreds of years ago or something like that. Like we think way far back, but once you open the records, you realize that it's like right there. It's like very easy to access. Some of your ancestors are literally like waiting for you, to do the healing or to ask for their guidance. I mean, they're just sitting there waiting, but we haven't been taught to communicate with our ancestors in that way. But the more I do the records, the more, I always ask like, who's working with me today? Who's the guide? Who's the teacher? So many times it is an ancestor or a version of myself,
right?
Yeah. And one of those guides was my younger self in this lifetime.
Yes.
Sometimes it'll be from like the 2nd century,
yes.
Some other lifetime. And sometimes it's me and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's, it is someone else that I don't personally remember, but I know that somehow they have, they're connected to me for a reason. And I don't think that like just strangers are working with us regularly. Like maybe there's passerbys, but most of the time there's some kind of link to keep them wanting to like assist you.
Yeah. I think they're invested in us, and I don't know, I don't have all the answers as to why, but they are invested in us, and I think maybe it is because we are a continuation of them, or maybe because we exist, they will exist again. The idea that we carry the memories of the people behind us. So we carry their traumas, we carry, we carry all of that. So again, if we're healing those things within us, we're healing it backwards.
I feel like this is why past life regression and some of those other things can be so healing, is there's so many like phobias and like things that happened, I think about the big flood. Being the big one, something like that would wipe out almost the entire planet. So I think many of us that are incarnated today either were a part of that or our ancestors. Right. And so I think many of us are still tapping into some of that fear of being completely wiped out.
Yeah.
I think that's why like the rainbow thing is so beautiful. Like to imagine the symbolism of like, this won't happen again, because we need like comfort, because we're traumatized as a collective of like, oh my gosh, are we gonna, is a comet gonna hit the earth? And it's like my son constantly will be like, what happens when the sun dies? Like he goes to like when is this all gonna implode? And I'm like, well, I don't know. But it's funny because I remember being a kid like having similar kinds of questions to that. But it's like we do have like some kind of fear ingrained into us of that, and there's other things that have happened, like inquisitions and things like that. People are scared to use their voice. They're scared to have different opinions. They're scared to speak out. It's because a lot of times it was either them or an ancestor, and they had to keep secret, their practices had to go very deep within because like they were being slaughtered for that. I mean, and I think that there's still like people have these blocked throat chakras, and I feel like it came from like that Inquisition time period. Like we're still struggling. We don't want, to be seen as like a witch or a pagan or, the words that they use them in a derogatory way. I don't use them in that way.
Yeah.
But like they're, that, us and them again, like, those people, like we've got to drown them out, and there was so many of us that were practicing magic and connected to the earth, and that's exactly what caused us, to be a target.
Yeah.
So I think we're still healing that. And as we come out and speak about our practices and our stories and share, it helps other people be okay, with that, because I do think a lot of people have a connection to spirit and they're terrified to say anything about it.
That's, my mom had asked me a few years ago why I didn't talk about these things when I was younger, because I was having all these experiences, but I would have these moments where I wanted to talk about it and I could feel my throat closing up. Mm-hmm. And it took me a pretty long time to feel comfortable being open about what I do and what I experience. And I had a past life regression that helped to answer that for me. And it was that I was a healer in a life before, and that someone had poisoned me. And it made me really scared to be in the limelight in this lifetime. So, anytime these conversations would come up, really until pretty recent years, I would just sit back and observe, listen, and that's the role that I would take. But, getting that little bit of information, it's like, oh, and again, I come back to, okay, mind, you're safe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Coming like out into the open with a lot of this, it's hard for me, because of my 12th house stellium. There's a lot hidden, and I actually thrive in like that hidden way. Like when I'm hidden, that's when I'm growing the most.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there was a point where I was getting like a lump in my throat. Okay. Like they said, it's the GERD, you have GERD or whatever. But like, I actually felt like something was stuck in there, and I have not had that at all since I started the podcast.
Oh yeah, since you stepped into your power and your purpose. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I asked the records today, like something about our conversation led into them talking about the 12th house. Oh. And they were like, it's important for you to do, to have that isolation, but it's also important for you to share the insights you receive from the isolation with the world. And that's how you find the balance, is like, do the spiritual work, go within, cut everyone off for a week, do the meditation, but it, like, if you don't share it, then what are you doing? It's like I'm hoarding spiritual knowledge that's coming to me,
Yeah, no.
Like, I don't want to do that.
That's very, the medicines, I love animal medicines. I've always been drawn to animals, and snake medicine shows up a lot for me. And it's that snake medicine. I always say, I'm in my snake medicine. I have to go away for a little while, because they keep evolving. They're always growing out of their skin, and they have to take that period to shed. And during that period, they're very vulnerable. They have to be somewhere safe and somewhere dark and somewhere quiet. But eventually, they come out, and other people might not realize that they've changed, but they've changed, and they continuously change.
Right.
Other people have more like butterfly medicine, whereas they might, go into a cocoon for some period, and it might get really ugly and really gooey.
Yeah.
But they're going to come out of that, and it's going to be this amazing transformation, like life-changing overnight sort of stuff. Snake medicine people don't get that. We don't have those major transformations. It's just little by little, like putting together beadwork. It's
right. Yeah. Okay. I definitely relate to that, because I'm a very patient person, and I do take on tasks that require me to do like one little thing at a time. I think, that's like embroidery is like a big art form for me that I just really love, and I'm really tuning in. It makes me think of the spider, because I'm working with thread, and I really put two and two. Candy, so she came on the show. she did a reading for me before she came on, and the animal spirit was tarantula.
Oh,
And it took me not a very long time, it's been a year, but it took me a while. But then the other day I was like, oh, it comes through my weaving.
but I think that's what this show is too. You said you're in 50 countries now, right? You're weaving a web.
It's a web.
Yeah.
Yes, I love that. Yeah. It's also the first record reading I ever had before I even really understood what was going on. They told me about the pod. I don't know if you've heard me talking about this on the show at all, but they said that I incarnated with a pod of people. Okay. And that we were all spread out. Okay. Because it was necessary for us to spread out so that we could hold that vibration in different parts of the world. But that we could meditate and connect with each other, and that we were all alone. Like every one of us felt alone. But when we meditate together and remember each other, that we can feel loved and connected. And it was so funny because like 2 years later on the show, I said podcast out loud. Like I just said it like finally clicked. I'm like, oh, the pod. But I was thinking about like whales, travel in pods.
Yeah.
And what do? Well, they sing. Yeah. And it carries like miles and miles out, these songs, this vibration. And so like later on I asked the records about the pod, and I was like, is this how I access the pod? And they were like, yes, this is how they can hear you. This is how you can connect. But it's not about me meeting them. It's about us not feeling alone. Yeah. And like knowing that there's another one out there like us, and that there's actually 98 of them. They specifically said there's 98, and we share a similar vibration. And so we're interested in similar things. Like we have certain missions like that we want to accomplish in this life. And that's what, makes us similar. But then the records are saying that everyone actually comes in with their own pods that have their own unique vibration. And you think about like this beautiful symphony when all of these pods are singing their different songs. It really makes me think about like underwater, like being in the ocean, and just like all this, there's always movement in the ocean. There's always things swimming by, but like there's a harmony going on as well. Like they're all existing together. And I don't know, it's just way beyond like.
No, I love this. That's the Nawa have a similar idea about being reincarnated. I don't know how many weather workers there are in the Nawa tradition. I should know. I just have never counted.
Right.
But, we live all over the world, and we come together for the same purpose. And it's really interesting because it does feel really lonely sometimes being out by ourselves. Right. But then we come together as this family twice a year, and it's very much like we're coming home. Right. But also you were talking about that, the whales singing underwater made me think, that's in the Bible, creation begins with God's voice. Right. Yeah. It all goes back to frequency, sound. Right. It's, each of these pods is keeping up their end of creation. Right. Yeah. Right. They're playing like their note, in the symphony. Like there's all these different chords. There's all these different styles of vocal ranges and all this stuff. And like, we really are like all singing together. Yeah. We're all like all of the different frequencies come together to create the song, and I feel like that song is like what the divine is in that way, and it's the sounds that we create. Like, you see some cymatics and you can see that figures come out of sound. And then, what continues like with that sound, like if God speaks and then things are formed, like think about how important our voice is, It goes back to what we were talking about with the, whether it's our voice or whatever our intention, it's what we're sending out there is really important. Right. It really is. And stepping back into, Neptune went direct today. And it's got me really thinking even more about the importance of living your truth, living your spirituality, and not just wearing it as a mask or an identity. It's like really living what we want to see in the world. Right. Yeah. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I don't call myself a this or that, but like I guess a key component of my beliefs is, that we're all God. And
Yeah.
I grew up singing What If God Was One of Us? Like I literally would play the song on repeat, and sometimes I'll still turn it on and like it'll make me emotional.
Yeah.
But I just think it's so funny, when people judge me for being, oh, she's some southern silly female that thinks she has something to say. And I'm like, do you really think that God's going to come to you in some form that, that like, and you're judging me because of my form, but like, that's all of us.
It's everything.
Right.
Everything that exists is an expression of the Creator.
Right.
It's everything.
Right. And it all has a unique message. Each animal has a message, each person. And it's just so funny when we start judging each other, saying, well, that person couldn't be a guru, or that person, oh, what a crappy Christian that person. It's like we're just constantly like picking at each other because we're like, oh, well, that's not how I would imagine God would act. And you're just like, oh, that's silly, because it's like everything is God. Everything is divine. And yeah, it definitely helps me just feel more in tune with everything. And like definitely like all the emotions we've talked about, like when they arise, I'm like, well, what is Spirit trying to tell me? Like, what is Spirit wanting me to know right now? And you can find the deeper meaning if you meditate on that long enough.
If you just look. That's the Stoics have another saying, amor fati. I love this. I love what's happening to me. And I think if you can go into that in every situation in life, it's going back to the GPS and navigation, but it's rather than getting into a frenzy when you're lost on a road, it's just allow time for the recalculation.
Right.
Be easy.
Right.
Maybe take the long way around. Maybe you're on a pilgrimage now.
Right. Right. I think of like the whole concept of pilgrimage. Like we can go on so many types of pilgrimages. The first time I ever went to music festival, I'd read the Canterbury Tales when I was a kid, and I always I thought of like pilgrimage, and I would think about like going on this spiritual journey with a group of people, and like everyone's got their weird personalities and like health issues and stuff. And when I went to my first Bonnaroo, I treated it as a sacred experience. I really did, and I was like, I'm going with these people. We're all different. We're going to learn different things, but we're uniting through our love for music. And it was beautiful. I mean, like I have great experiences with festivals. I spread them way out. I treat them as like a sacred thing. And like you can go on a pilgrimage like to the mountains, It doesn't have to be, something that makes sense to anyone else. If you're taking a sacred journey, maybe that pilgrimage is inside.
Yeah. Maybe
you're just traveling with your mind. Like maybe it's not a physical here to there, but like maybe you're journeying within, making space.
Yeah. It might be, going back to making art. That's a great place to go on pilgrimage.
Yes.
Because bringing together a piece of music or a painting or a sculpture or a dance or food, whatever it is, that doing the research, going into that mode where you're going into creative mode, that's pilgrimage.
Right. You're like, you almost like prep before you start. You get all your materials ready, right before you leave on your adventure.
And then eventually you throw the pack on and start walking.
Right.
Yeah. And at the end, something beautiful is created from it.
I love that. This is really bringing up the Fool card for me. And I'm just imagining this, like you got your pack and your dog and you're about to, go on this adventure. And I think sometimes when we first learn tarot, like when we see the Fool, we think, oh, the Fool, that's a stupid card, But I'm like, you're the Fool because like you're going on the journey, and the Fool is just blissfully unaware of what's coming, and like, but he doesn't care that he doesn't know. He wants to seek it out anyways, and he does. He's not trying to like act like he knows.
No, he's just willing.
Right.
He's
and so
willing
in that
to
way,
step off that precipice and dive into it.
So the Fool is an archetype. And I think sometimes we think of like the jester or something. I'm like, no, the Fool is different. No. Okay. And it's like that, just that seeking, and then the courage to take the first step. Yeah. So. I love that. So, is there anything else that you would like to add before we wrap up today?
Just to talk about relationship, to everything around you, relationship to nature, the way that we can stay connected in the world as it's changing. I think this is a wonderful way to stay connected in the world as it's changing, using the internet and social media as a tool rather than a weapon. Go into your yard or your living room or wherever that is and really connect to all the things around you. Realize that there's a relationship between us and everything that we have or are surrounded by, and just connect to those things, make good relationships with them, nurture, tend, and live a good life.
I love that. I love thinking of technology in a positive way because it does get a bad rap, and it can be used to do terrible things. But I mean, you think of looking back on the ancient civilizations, when you watch these documentaries, they're like, they had this ancient technology and all this. And anytime you think of like the future beings, they have technology. So it's not the technology.
No.
It's how we're using it. The technology is actually a part of our evolution that I don't think that we're supposed to resist.
Right.
But we are supposed to be mindful as it's growing, to make sure that we are, like, the old and new ways are in balance. So we are still connected to nature.
Well, just like those relationships to people, we have to curate our spaces. We have to, if you have an Instagram or a Facebook or TikTok or whatever, make sure that you're curating that space the same way that you would, your yoga studio, your living room. Make sure that it brings you peace and not anything else.
Right. Chaos and drama.
Yeah. It should inspire you. Right. We have all this knowledge at our fingertips, and again, we can choose to use it as a tool or a weapon. That's a choice.
Right. Yeah, I've grown a lot. I mean, having access to all of this wisdom. I mean, there was a point where I didn't really have a lot of money to buy a lot of books. So I would find these sites and they had uploaded these things for free, or, we're finding people online was so big. Like, so many of the friends that I have, I actually met on the internet, because we had like things that were similar in our interests. And like, those are some of my best friends, because growing up in that small town, I didn't really like make a lot of friends. And so, but it was because I had really weird interests, which really it wasn't as weird once I branched out a little bit. And I'm like, well, there's actually like millions of people that are into this. There just were none in the radius I grew up in.
But through the internet, you've created this web where you've made yourself accessible. And we would have never had this conversation had it not been for Instagram.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, do you want to share how people can follow you, or are you wanting to open that up?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Most people just call me.
Okay.
Or, text me. That's better.
Okay.
You can text me at 865-454-4616. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Just Intuitive Alchemy.
All right. Beautiful. Beautiful. Do you do so I know you do readings, but is there some of the weather, do you do that with, or is that just a personal experience with the weather? And
that is, most of that is done in Mexico.
Okay.
When I go there. But there may possibly be things opening up here.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So people can follow you and just see how that unfolds, or book a reading with you.
Right.
So
you can book readings and energy work.
All right. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to
thank you.
Come out here. It's been wonderful. And thank you all for tuning in. Check us out next time on the Astral Hour.